Our next speaker is the only Scandinavian in the panel. Vebjoern Selbekk is editor-in-chief for the Norwegian daily called Steyn. In 2006, he became the symbol of the Norwegian part of the cartoon crisis. And we are looking forward to hearing your report on the Norwegian Muhammad cartoon crisis. And I should add that Vebjoern Selbekk 4 days ago received a Free Press Award together with Flemming Rose.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, when I searched through my emails in my office in Oslo on the 11th of January 2006, I found some extremely disturbing material. 2 pictures were attached to one of the emails. Photos of a burned body. On the first picture, you could see the black mass of human flesh in a casket, ready to be buried. The other was a close-up shot of that person's face. You could almost see the agony of death in his features. Together with this picture was a text. It read, "Mr. Selbekk, you have to put yourself in this man's situation because of what you have done when you allowed cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to be printed in your newspaper." This was the first of 50 death threats that I received in what was to become the Norwegian part of the international cartoon crisis. Actually, I stopped counting threats when they reached 50. It could have been many more. And the threats were pretty direct. "We will come into your bedroom and kill you. We will cut your head off, await your death," stuff like that. From one day to another, my family and me went from a quiet, ordinary life to suddenly be standing in the middle of a hurricane, a nightmare in bright daylight. We had to start to relate to lifeguards, police protection, living on different addresses, and ultimately selling and moving from our home. It was impossible to continue to live there with children aged 9, 13, and 15. Our address was compromised on the internet. We had no other choice than to move. My crime was that I, in the early days of January 2006, had reprinted the Jyllands-Posten's cartoons in my newspaper, Magasinet. We were working on a cover story regarding Islamistic threats against freedom of speech. We had interviewed leading Norwegian cartoonists. One of them was Finn Graff. He is maybe the hardest hitting cartoonist in the history of Norwegian press. One of his specialities is drawing Israeli prime ministers as Holocaust camp guards. He has done that with almost every prime minister of the Jewish state since Menachem Begin's days in the late 70s. But Mr. Graff told us that he would never draw the Prophet Muhammad, not because he had more respect towards the Muslim faith than other religions or ideologies. No, he bluntly put it this way in the interview: "I have to draw the line somewhere. I do not want to get my throat cut. Therefore, I will refrain from drawing Muhammad." I thought this was very interesting. It was provoking to give Islam a form of special treatment because some Muslim believers threaten people and perform acts of violence and terror. At the same time, we had heard about 12 cartoons of Muhammad in Denmark's leading newspaper, Jyllands-Posten. At this time, there was some controversy. There had been some minor demonstrations Ambassadors from Muslim countries had tried to protest to Prime Minister Anders Fogh Rasmussen, but he would not receive them. We have nothing to discuss. Denmark is a country of free speech and free press, he said. In this cover story that we were working on, we also wanted to write about these Danish controversial cartoons. We interviewed Karsten Juste, the editor-in-chief of Jyllands-Posten at that time, and we wrote an article about what, at that time, looked like an emerging, but still pretty local, cartoon controversy in Denmark. And then the question that journalists ask every day arose. Do we have pictures? If this had been a story about almost any other topic, this question would not even have to come to the editor's desk. Show, don't tell. This is a fundamental thing for us journalists. We write about Danish cartoons, then let us show our readers what the cartoons look like. But this time, it was not that simple. For the first time in my career as an editor, I had to consider new and quite unpleasant questions. Could printing this material be dangerous for me? Would someone threaten me? Could someone try to kill me, my family, attack the newspaper? In the newsrooms, many decisions are taken in a couple of seconds, but the decision to reprint the Muhammad cartoons was not among them. Actually, we used 2-3 days to consider what to do. In the end, it became almost like a matter of conscience for me. I thought that if I chose not to print the cartoons, I had in reality given the terrorists and extremists a veto in a free newspaper in a free country. I would have accepted that terrorists should be a part of editorial decision-making. I would have given them a place around the table. You do not want us to publish this material? And you are prepared to use violence to punish us if we do? Okay then, let us not publish the cartoons. I felt that I could not and would not back down to such threats. And therefore, on January the 10th, 2006, the Muhammad cartoons were published in my newspaper, Magasinet. And almost immediately, the death threats start pouring in, like a black and muddy wave of hate. The powers of extremist Islam was unleashed, and I was standing in the middle of it all. It was such a surrealistic feeling, like looking at the situation from the outside. What makes the Norwegian cartoon crisis so special is also the behavior of the Norwegian Labour government at that time. In my opinion, it was a shameful behavior. They deliberately picked me as their scapegoat. They were prepared to sacrifice my family and me to make peace with extremists in the Middle East and to secure votes from the Muslim minority in Norway. You cannot find any other examples in the Western countries of situations during the cartoon crisis where governments put this kind of pressure on one newspaper and on one editor. From the very beginning, the Norwegian government chose to divide the responsibility for the crisis between the extremists on one side and me on the other side. In one of his first statements, the Foreign Minister of Norway, Mr. Jonas Gahr Støre, actually used the expression extremists on both sides. It was easy to understand what he meant. Those who burn flags and threaten with violence in the Middle East, they are extremists. But we are no better here in Norway. We have our own extremists, homegrown extremists. People like Mr. Selbekk, who published cartoon of Muhammad, Islam's holy prophet. And when the Danish and Norwegian embassies in Damascus were attacked and burned down on the 4th of February 2006, our Prime Minister, Jens Stoltenberg, made the same comparison. And he is now the General Secretary of NATO. Mr. Stoltenberg gave a statement to Norway's biggest newspaper, Verdensgang. There he said that Selbekk was partly responsible for the attack on the embassy. He stated that printing the cartoons was a wrong thing to do. But he added that the demonstrators should not react with violence to this wrongdoing by the Norwegian editor. Please remember, that these remarks from the Prime Minister came in a situation where the death threats against me were coming in on a daily basis. Of course, this statement, these remarks, made the security situation much worse for my family and me. I felt like I was made an official enemy of the state by our head of the government. This is the man who is partly responsible for the worst attack against Norwegian property in foreign countries since World War II. I felt like the Prime Minister pointed his finger at me and almost made me a legal target. Mr. Stoltenberg's remarks represent my darkest hour during the cartoon crisis. The pressure was almost unbearable, the death threats, the political pressure, and the continuous hunt by domestic and foreign media. It is not a given fact that I would come through this with my life, my health, and my marriage intact, but I did. I'm often asked the question of whether what I did was worth everything my family and I had to go through. I really want to say yes to that question. And this is because I find these values so important and so fundamental. And being the son of a refugee from communist East Germany, I have first-hand experience of what a society becomes when freedom of speech is suppressed and denied. My mother was born in East Germany, or in the almost mockingly so-called German Democratic Republic. In 1957, my grandmother took her children with her, 2 children, and fled from East Germany to create a new future in the free world. Mom, my mother, was 10 years old when she arrived in Norway as part of a Red Cross program for children, East German children living in refugee camps in West Berlin. And what was supposed to be a nice Scandinavian summer away from the dull life as a refugee child, well, she's still living in Norway. And as a child, and also in my early youth, I visited East Germany a lot of times. My grandparents were divorced, and my grandfather stayed in GDR when his ex-wife and 2 children secretly left to flee to the West. My grandfather lived the rest of his life there, and we used to visit him during the summers and other holidays. My experiences with communist East Germany have influenced me a lot. It has shaped my views on politics, and certainly my views on human rights, not least of freedom of speech. In GDR, people did not dare to speak their minds. This was in many ways a given fact, something everybody knew and everybody related to. It was not that the East Germans didn't have strong opinions about the government, about communism, about the ban on traveling. Most people had a lot they wanted to say on these topics, but they kept their mouth shut. They feared the consequences. They feared the secret police, Stasi, Ministerium für Staatssicherheit. I myself can also remember this uneasy feeling that you could experience everywhere in East Germany. It was almost as a part of the air you breathed. Even within the walls of the house, the private home of our relatives, we had to ask who could hear us, were we being bugged, were our phone calls being caught on tape. Today, there are few things that provoke me more, make me more angry than this, that people should feel fear about expressing their opinions. In my view, this use of fear mechanisms to suppress free speech are actually expressions of a totalitarian way of thinking. Yes, as I see it, it is the very trademark of totalitarian ideology. And that is the case whether these demands and limitations of freedom of speech is being defended by political arguments or by religious arguments. And in post-communist Europe, in our time, the emphasis is on this last point: religiously backed threats against free speech. Today, I'm glad to say that the situation has changed a lot for me in Norway during the 10 years that has passed since the cartoon crisis. Opinion polls show that a majority of Norwegians now support my decision to reprint the cartoons. And earlier this week, as was mentioned, I was awarded the Fritt Ord Honor Award, one of the most prominent freedom of speech prizes in Norway. I was awarded the prize together with Flemming Rose, a great and humbling honor for me. And the way Mr. Støre, our foreign minister at that time, handled the cartoon crisis has today become a political problem for him. Also a problem in his efforts to become our next prime minister. Ladies and gentlemen, January the 7th of this year was a grim and pitch black day for freedom of speech. The darkest in Europe since the end of World War II. The terrorists finally succeeded with their murderous plans. 12 people were left in a pool of blood in and outside of a newspaper office in the heart of Europe. Let us use this day to honor their memory. The memory of Charlie Hebdo's martyrs for freedom of speech. When it comes to these topics, these specific topics, cartoons, blasphemy, and certain aspects of the Muslim religion, freedom of speech is under heavy pressure in Europe. In this particular area, freedom of speech, I would say, is under siege in Europe. Just as we, in a way, are under siege here in this building today. In our time, freedom of speech has to be protected with machine guns. We could also describe the situation with different words, even more dramatic words. In this area, freedom of speech is literally under fire. A rain of bullets, as we have seen in such a dramatic and disgusting way in Paris and here in Copenhagen this year. These extremists, they hate our values, they hate our freedom, and they hate Jews. They use automatic weapons against cartoons, bullets against pencils. They kill Jews, not for anything they have done, but for who they are, just as we have seen so many times before in the dark annals of European history. Let us also use, and I'm closing with this, let us also use this opportunity today to reflect on the long-term consequences of the attacks in Paris and Copenhagen. The results of the acts of terror against freedom of speech are not visible in the short terms. In the first few weeks that followed the Charlie Hebdo attack, everyone wanted to be Charlie. But what happens after the demonstrations, or after the politically supportive statements? What happens when everyday life returns? Are we then still as determined not to back down? Or will fear and self-censorship slowly but surely make its way? Will we once again begin to give in? Maybe I shouldn't write this article. Maybe I shouldn't print this illustration. Maybe we shouldn't invite this speaker. It will create so much hassle, and it could also be dangerous. The question I am asking back in Norway, and the question that I think we all should ask all over the Western world is this: are we choosing freedom or fear in the age of terrorism? I'm worried about the long-term damaging effects that could happen to the freedom of speech, because now everyone has seen what it will cost to defy the terrorists. The people who say that they will avenge and protect the Prophet with their blood and their lives and restore his honor wherever it is under attack. One can no longer say that these are empty threats after January the 7th, 2015. Editors, journalists, writers, publishers, cartoonists, artists, and debate organizers now that they have to deal with the aspects of threats and fear. I feel that it is very important that we continue to give a clear answer to those who have made bloodshed into a form of religious duty and murder into a form of worship. We do this by straightening our backs and not letting ourselves be subdued. We do it by refusing to be threatened into being silent. Our response to the terrorists must be that we continue to use our freedom of speech as we please, also in the way that they demand that we do not use it. And if we do not do this, they will win. If we do not do this, they will have accomplished what they wanted through their bloody actions. If not, we will have given the terrorists the right to determine our future. Our Western societies are far from perfect. But the fact that we have built democracies where everyone has the right to say, think, believe, worship, write, and draw whatever he wants, it is nothing to be ashamed of. On the contrary, these are universal rights, the fundamentals of a true democracy, something every human being should experience no matter where in the world he or she lives. In today's situation, these values are most strongly being defended in Western societies. We should be proud of these freedom values. They are worthy of being exported, and they are worth defending, no matter how much they burn flags and embassies in the Middle East, and no matter how much they threaten us with acts of terrorism. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Vebjørn. Now we have time for questions and comments to Vebjoern Selbekk. Yes? Dan?
Hello, my name is Christiansborg, and I'm the head of information for the Democrats of Norway. This is a national conservative party. And Vebjørn, you know that you are my big hero. I mean, I look up to you as my role model for protecting freedom of speech. So I just have so much respect for you.
Thank you.
I'd like to get some advice from how can we confront those who say extremists on both sides, like our foreign minister. Yesterday, actually, I was in shock. I was living at the Danhosten.dk. And I tried to go into Trykkefrihedsselskabet, Free Press Society.dk, and I was told this is a hate site. It's a site for hate. So I wrote an email that Katrine got a copy of, and to Mikael Hjalmar and to a lot of journalists. So my question to you is, as an experienced journalist, how can we use our rights to answer such ridiculous things, and how can we protect freedom of speech?
Thank you for the question. I think that the answer is to continue to live as we have done before. Because the terrorists and the extremists, I think they can smell our fear. And therefore, it's so important not to be afraid. To continue writing the articles, to continue printing whatever material you want to print, to continue having debates like this, that's the answer. To do as we have done before and not let the terrorists threaten us into being silent. That is my question. That is my answer to your question.
I have a question. Jyllands-Posten it was in February, announced that they're not going to reprint the Muhammad cartoons. So they're not doing what you just said we should do. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I have. This is I don't know, it's in Norway, and I think it's also in English, we have an expression, it's called an omen. It's also one word in the Danish language. It's like a bad sign, like an evil sign. And that is the way I look at Jyllands-Posten's choice not to print the cartoons in February. Let me say I can understand them. Of course I can, because they have been in the middle of this storm for 10 years. They are maybe one of the biggest terrorist targets in the world. I can understand them. But at the same time, I feel it hurts me a lot that they have to do this. This is a way, in a way the terrorists have won. When the symbol of the whole cartoon crisis cannot print the cartoons. It's a very, very serious matter. But one thing is good with the way Jyllands-Posten treated this case. They have the guts to admit why they are not printing it. They say that it's because we are afraid. In Norway, a lot of newspapers, they found other explanations with a great fantasy. They said, we are not printing these cartoons because you can find them on the internet. Things like that. It's a joke. But Jyllands-Posten, they had the courage to say it is, and admit what was the reason for not printing. And that is a good thing.
Thank you, Vebjørn. I think one last question before the next speaker.
Thank you for taking my question. You mentioned the place that terrorists have at the table in editorial decision-making capacity, and how you presented that, and how we did not want to make that be a factor. Now, legally speaking, in Europe, it's my understanding that it's not only terrorists or people who threaten violence that are seeking a seat at the editorial table. It's my understanding that in Brussels, there are a lot of people who treat the concept of what's come to be called hate speech as a real thing, as a legitimate category, as something to be observed or for rules to be made about. To what degree do you think that Brussels is desirous to see at the editorial table as well? To what degree do you think Europe's own institutions are trying to edge their way into that decision-making process?
Yeah, well, as you know, and some of us are very thankful for that, Norway is not a member of the European Union, so we do not have. We do not have to take orders from Brussels. And what I can say about the Norwegian situation, I think it has become better during these 10 years, also when it comes to hate speech regulations. Today, I think it would be very, very difficult in the Norwegian context to start a legal process against someone saying or writing material about Islam, or also racist remarks. In Norway, in this area, the freedom of speech is becoming broader, and I'm thankful for that. And the situation in the European Union, I can't say much about that.
Thank you, Vebjørn.